is the Bright MLS, what's called the Clear MLS policy. It was started a couple of years ago by Bright MLS, but the National Association of Realtors, which has 1,400,000 members, adopted the policy over a year ago. And we need to live with the policy. Maybe it's almost 2 years ago now that it was developed. The policy, this Clear MLS policy, is meant to address some problems that have been developing in the marketplace. And it's funny, most people with self-interest, which I think we all have self-interest, sometimes want to have it both ways. We want other people to obey the policy, but we don't want to obey the policy. We're going to talk about this policy that I think is really good. Christina supports it completely. The idea is that no one should be able to have a listing that they keep secret, that you pocket the listing, you keep it quiet so that only you and the special people that you want to hear about it will hear about the listing and have an opportunity to buy it. That may sound like a good thing to do, but it's not very good for your client, your seller, to whom you owe fiduciary duties, because the best thing for your client is to have exposure to as large of the marketplace as possible, especially qualified buyers. That's how the seller gets the highest and best terms in the shortest period of time, not by an agent pocketing the listing and keeping it quiet. On the other hand, in today's market, we have buyers who are saying, "Oh, don't you know of any listings that you can tell me about that no one else knows about? Because I don't want to be in competition with, 5 other people or a dozen other people when I go to make an offer." So there's a tendency to want to have it both ways, but the way we have to have it is the way that we give full exposure to all properties, and we have to do everything we can to help our sellers get the best price possible and the best terms possible. I think in this market, we are more valuable as listing agents than ever before, because we're able to manage the multiple offers and understand what it means when a buyer waives mortgage financing and they still need to get a mortgage, or they waive inspections, but they still want to, quote, do inspections for informational purposes only. And all these complicated issues that we on this Breakfast with Your Broker in the past have dealt with. And Christina does an excellent course on how to write competitive offers for your buyer. Those are issues related. But what we need to do is talk about the Clear MLS policy from Bright. And we need to understand that during COVID-19, Bright cut everybody a little bit of a break in that they would give everybody a warning before they would fine them. Now, Bright is extremely serious about this policy because the fines are tremendous. The first offense for failing to put a listing in the MLS, for failing to submit that listing to the MLS in a timely manner, the first offense is $5,000. The second offense for an agent is $10,000. And the third offense is $15,000. And you probably get thrown out of the MLS at that point. So nobody can afford to pay these types of fines, but these fines are going to be here. And that's almost a guarantee. We don't want any of them to be against our office and anyone who's on this call, because we have the knowledge to avoid the problem. And I'm going to say the policy in a second, and then I'm going to let Christina do as much talking as she wants on the topic. And I'm going to let you all ask as much information as possible. By the way, even rental listings fall under this category. The good news about rental listings is the first fine is only $500, and the second fine is $1,000, and the third fine is $1,500. So even rental listings have to obey the rule. The rule is that we must submit every listing. The rule has always been this way, that we have to submit every listing the office has within 3 business days of getting that listing. And that's been the rule for years and years. It's just now the fine is coming forward and a new twist is being added to it. So as a member of the MLS, we've always been obligated to submit all of our listings to the MLS. That's something that your broker, yours truly, signs on to when we join the MLS. We agree to submit 100% of our listings, no exceptions, to the MLS. The new twist with the Clear MLS policy is if you get caught with a listing that you haven't submitted to the MLS and they catch you public marketing it, and public marketing is as simple as putting a sale sign on it or sending out an email blast to your clients or posting it on Facebook. That's public marketing, putting a for sale sign on it. And if you get caught public marketing a listing, you no longer have 3 days to submit it to the MLS, but you have 1 business day at that point. And if you violate that rule, it's $5,000. So we must submit all of our listings to the MLS within 3 business days before we public marketing them. If we're going to public market them, if you're going to walk to a seller's house, get him to sign a listing contract, leave with the listing contract and put the for sale sign in the front lawn, you now have 1 business day to submit that to the MLS, or you're going to get the $5,000 fine. Now, who do you think is going to report you to the MLS when you violate this rule? You bet the buyers and your fellow agents who are working with those buyers. And you're going to see how it works if you simply obey the rules. And I think we all do that. So Christina, why don't you say something at this point?
Sure. Well, I could bring up the documents and the websites that state this policy, but it is pretty clear. It's called the Clear Cooperation Policy because that is the point. It means to enforce cooperation among MLS members, among realtors across the marketplace with no exception. We have an ethical obligation in the Code of Ethics to cooperate with other realtors. And it lines up with our duties to our clients because it's in their best interest. And as the market has become more and more competitive over the last few years, it has become more and more of a problem to enforce this fair and cooperative market where everybody has equal access. So the policy is, Dominic already said it, if you publicly market a property in any way, public marketing, a sign, an email blast, a social media post, anything that is available to the general public or to a mass of people who are the public. If you do any public marketing, that listing must be in the MLS within 1 business day. And right now the MLS defines business days as weekdays, Monday through Friday. But watch out for this because MLSs across the country are still having problems with the fact that weekends aren't counted as business. And there are agents trying to take advantage of that fact by getting, 2 days of marketing on a property before, before this policy kicks in on Monday. And there are large MLSs across the country who are deciding in their policy that Saturday now counts as a business day because they are trying to close the window where people are using unfair practices to have, exclusive access to listings.
Christina, talk about how coming soon affects this situation.
So coming soon doesn't change this at all, but it is a useful option in order to help us comply with this policy. So you have the choice when you enter a listing into the MLS, right? It can be active, fully active, allowing showings. It can be, various other statuses. And one of the other statuses that might be appropriate at the beginning of a listing is coming soon. So if the property is not to have showings, to have anybody go in that property, then you can enter it in the MLS as a coming soon listing. That complies with this policy. You are in the MLS and every member of the MLS has equal access to it.
And you can public market coming soon all you want. Absolutely. You can put a for sale sign, email blast, or Facebook post. Yep. Market the life out of a coming soon, but don't allow anybody into the coming soon.
Exactly. So as long as it's entered in the MLS, even if it is in the coming soon status, you can publicly market it. You just can't show a property in the coming soon status. So, so that's, we could say it 5 more times, but it is a really straightforward policy, really simple. Any public marketing means that listing must be in the MLS within 1 business day, period, full stop. And the only exceptions to this rule are really, really small exceptions. If you are listing a property that the seller decides it's not in their interest to be in the MLS, and to be clear, this is very hard to imagine. There's almost no reason why that would be the case. Anybody who says that their seller decides it's in the best interest, I will say that that agent probably hasn't given that seller all the objective information. But in theory, it's possible for a seller to decide they don't want to be in the MLS. And if that's the case, you still have to submit information about that listing to the MLS. If you're a member, you promise to submit information, but you're going to submit the information about the listing along with a waiver form, if that is appropriate, because your seller says they don't want it in the MLS. And if that's the case, you publicly market that listing at all. If it is not going to be in the MLS because your seller doesn't want it there, then you have no ability to do any public marketing, period. So,
and by the way,
you can see why
the broker needs to sign the waiver form, and I don't particularly sign waiver forms. So, and no public marketing if you do that.
Right. So there are those rare, very rare exceptions where you don't enter all the listing information to be publicly viewed in the MLS, but you still have to submit the information with the waiver so that it's not marketed in the MLS, and you can't do any public marketing. So the only thing that has changed recently, and the reason we're talking about this again, is that in the last week or so this policy has already been in effect in our MLS for over a year. And it's true for every NAR affiliated MLS across the country, same or very similar policy. They all have to comply with NAR's rules. And the change that has taken place recently is that they have stepped up enforcement starting today, May 10th. They will only allow, they're eliminating some of the grace period and some of the exceptions they've made. So previously they've allowed time for listing agents to correct and to enter the listing. And
only 1 day. They would call you up, give you a warning, give you 24 hours to get it in. If you didn't get it in, they fined you $5,000. Now, the new memo that you got last week confused everybody. It says from now on, every office gets one day warning once a year.
Yeah.
Which 400 agents is nothing. Yeah. And then you immediately get the $5,000 fine. So we're going to get the $5,000 fine immediately.
Somebody, right. I mean, there's so many agents in our large offices that, that one exception, that one grace period will be gone the first time any one of our many agents, make a mistake. So basically there is no grace period, and the fines will be faster now. And they have some good rationale behind this. I mean, this has been a year. They gave us 6 months of warning before they implemented it. They implemented it more than a year ago. They have been very generous about their enforcement of the policy for the past year, but they've given it a whole year for us to be educated on it and get to know how the violation system works. And now they're saying, okay, here we are later, pandemic's winding down. We've got to be serious about this. Also, they are responding to the elevated number of complaints from subscribers. So it's not as though the problems are not out there. They know that people are still breaking the rules or stretching the rules and taking advantage of the leniency. So they are going to now take a pretty hard line, and the fines are going to be faster.
Christina, before we take questions, I want to go into 2 challenging areas. Number one, people are asking, well, if we just communicate a new listing within our own office, say on our closed Facebook page, That's not public marketing. And the rules do say that within your own office, you can talk about a new listing without calling it public marketing, but it can't get out of that group and go into public marketing. The other thing is, and this is where I really want you to come to my rescue, Christina, is I want you to address the fact that people talk about a listing they're going to get, or they act like they have a listing before they have the listing contract signed and executed. How does that work with this policy?
Okay, so you could still get into trouble, but you have to go back a little bit and back up to the questions of real estate regulation and law in Pennsylvania. So nobody is allowed to market it or promote in any way a property for sale or for rent. You can't start that property or marketing that property at all in any way without written permission to do so. And that means you have to have a listing contract before you can talk about it. So you have to actually have a listing contract. That listing contract has to have a price. And then, of course, once you have an executed listing contract, you are able to market it, but you also have the obligations of being a member of the MLS, where you must put it in the MLS within 3 days and within 1 day if you publicly market. So you cannot start spreading the word about a listing before you have a listing contract. Now, within the office, if you keep this to within the office, if you're sitting in the training room and talking about needs and wants, and you say, oh, well, I have a listing I'm working on, might list in a month, within the office is not going to report you. You're not going to be violating rules if you make sure it stays within the office. You cannot promote a listing without a listing contract.
Christina, I have war story after war story, some of them recently, of agents promoting listings before they had it signed, and buyers go they find out where the house is. They go directly to the seller, and no agents make any money. And the cat got out of the bag because somebody promoted a listing before they had it. Yeah.
In this market, this is the problem, right? Listing agents, we're excited to have properties. But as soon as we let people know about them, if we don't have a listing contract, we're not involved. We're not going to get a commission. And if anybody else finds out about that before, they'll take whatever advantage they can get. Buyers agents will, do whatever it takes to try to get a house. And if we have a listing contract, we won't get paid. It's also just sort of stupid to talk about listing when you don't have a listing contract. And certainly that would go for, posting on social media, et cetera. And here's where some people think they can bend the rules. You see this a lot where people share information about a listing on social media without an address, but maybe they include a picture, or maybe it's only a picture of the kitchen. And they talk about a listing coming in XYZ neighborhood or school district. They think they're escaping. They think they've found a loophole because they think they're not advertising the specific property, but they are clearly talking about a specific property. If you have a picture, if you have a kitchen, you are advertising a specific property. You must have a listing contract before you are permitted to do that, or you're violating law. And you are publicly marketing a listing, a specific property. So as soon as anybody can identify that property, clear cooperation policy, if you've publicly marketed it without.
Christina, buyers are smart and they listen and they hear little indications of a description of the property. I heard one recently where they talked about a particular tree that the property had or something like that. And the buyers drove around the neighborhood. They found the tree. They talked to the owner. They bought the house without any agent.
Social media makes this easier than ever because everybody can connect and know so much about people through social media. So you post a picture of a kitchen or a front door and you think you haven't identified the property, but then somebody on social media says, oh, I know that house. And the next person who was looking for it clicks on that person and says, oh, what house is that? How do you know it? And they say, oh, it's my neighbor, or it's across the street. And then they know where it is. And then they figure out how to reach the seller and boom. So, the competition in the marketplace just makes it a lot easier to get in trouble. That, as I keep saying about this market, everything is just very high stakes. And that means there's a more chance of us losing the opportunity to list the property or getting fined if we violate the rules. And not only that, but not helping our sellers who deserve the best terms possible on the open market. Dividing or excluding people from the market, from the opportunity to see a listing, is not helping anybody. And a lot of sellers, people will say, oh, well, my seller didn't want, 500 people tramping through the house, or, they didn't want, the stress of multiple offers. And, I just call BS on that. That is stupid, because our job as professionals is we can manage and control that process. So you don't have to have hundreds of people trekking through your property. You don't have to have showings when they're not convenient to you. You don't have to feel stressed and burdened by multiple offers. That's to make sure we manage that for our clients without restricting the market. So all of that is just an excuse.
Christina, I think we're ready for questions, but I saw one question come up in chat. And the question was, if you double end a for sale by owner, well, by definition, if you sell for sale by owner, you got both sides of it, guys.
Well, but you have both sides?
And you need to use
unrepresented seller. It's not a represented seller.
Okay, but 1 second. You need a broker's fee agreement. Those sales do not fall under this rule at all. If you're able to find an unrepresented seller and bring a buyer directly to that seller, the MLS rules don't apply. Here's what the MLS rules say, and I only got them printed up recently. How does that property ever even end up in the MLS? Well, Bright MLS wants the data. They want the statistic, and the appraisers want to know that, you sold this, unrepresented seller's house. I don't use that 4-letter word, the one that begins with F. Okay, I don't use that word. So an unrepresented seller. So the rule from the MLS is the agent that has the buyer in that transaction is allowed after settlement to report the listing to the MLS for statistical purposes only. And the listing agent comes up as non-existent, a non-member listing agent. I forget the category, but even if there is a listing agent, even if this unrepresented seller says, oh, I've got a real estate friend who's going to help me on my end of the transaction, and you help the buyer, the agent that helps the seller never gets to put that property in the MLS and never gets any credit for it. Only the buyer's agent is allowed to put it in the MLS after settlement as the sale of a non-listed property. So that's totally fine. You can do that every day of the week. Go out and sell as many unrepresented sellers as you can get. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about listed properties.
And we should be able to see easily why that doesn't fall under this rule. Because if the seller is not represented, the seller does not have a listing contract. So that is not a property by a member of the MLS. And if you represent a buyer who approaches this unrepresented seller, you do not get a listing contract signed by that seller. Even if the seller is agreeing to pay you, they are probably doing that with a broker fee agreement. They are not doing it with a listing contract. Now, if property for them, you become a listing agent and then the rules apply. But
okay,
the definition of an unrepresented seller is an unrepresented seller.
We have another very important topic to discuss today, but I want to take questions on this clear MLS policy, what we've been talking about for the past half hour. Any questions? You can unmute yourself. You can put the question in chat, whatever you feel comfortable doing. Well, gee, I think everybody understands this, and everybody's going to get their listings into the MLS within 3 business days, unless they want to put a for sale sign on it. Then they're going to get it in the MLS within 1 day. but you can easily put it in the MLS for coming soon. One of the things we didn't say about coming soon is the Bright MLS rules only allows you to leave a coming soon listing for 21 days as coming soon. After that, they automatically start market time. They turn it into an active listing. And if you don't want showings, you're going to have to put it as temporarily off the market at that point. And that works as well. But remember, too, that coming soon and temporarily off the market means no showings by anyone. However, and somebody got very confused recently about this, the seller has a right to still accept offers without showings. And you can write an offer on a property without ever showing the property. Heck, didn't we do that during COVID-19 in the early days when we weren't allowed to show properties, period? But no, you can write an offer. But, depends what kind of contingencies are in the offer, what price it is. You think it's dangerous waiving mortgage and waiving inspections. What about waiving seeing the property, period? That's pretty dangerous, but it can be done. We cannot stop. It's against the law for us to not present an offer that comes in on a property that hasn't been shown to the buyer. A lot of people say to me, well, how can the buyer make an offer if they never saw the property? They can do it. It's illegal. It's just not necessarily advisable. So that's why legitimately some coming soon properties can go from coming soon to pending without ever going to active. You wonder who's doing something unethical. Well, maybe someone did do something unethical and allow a buyer in, but it could happen where they still did things ethically and it happened anyway. So I wanted to bring that to your attention as well. Any comments, Christina?
I think we have Paul. Yep.
Paul.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had a situation where another agent let me and my buyer in during the coming soon. We wrote an offer and it was accepted. And so the listing went to pending. So I guess the question is, how would anyone know that
Christina, why don't I try it and then you pull me back, okay? Paul, I think you as a buyer's agent did what was best for your buyer, but the listing agent clearly violated the code of ethics and can get in big trouble for that. But I don't think you or your buyer are going to make a complaint about the listing agent. You could, but if someone else found that out and they made the complaint, the listing agent would be in big trouble. I don't think you get in trouble because the listing agent said, I cleared it with the seller. You can come show your buyer the house. I have it coming soon. It's the listing agent's responsibility to obey the rule and to change the status to active before he lets anyone in the property. What do you think, Christina?
I agree. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately for Paul and for your client, but the listing agent was in violation, and it is still possible. Any other realtor or consumer who finds out that happened and that it is a violation, they have 180 days from the time they discover it to file a complaint. So that could still happen, and that listing agent would be in violation, clearly.
Here's a more common story, Paul. The seller, without his listing agent knowing while a property is coming soon, lets a buyer in the house. The buyer then writes an offer up, presuming they have an agent, or they write an offer up, and the seller accepts it. The seller is not bound by the code of ethics and is not bound by the rules. So if that listing agent did get complained about, maybe he's got a defense. Maybe he says, I never knew the buyer ever came to the property. My seller, was friends with the parents of the buyer and let them in without me knowing it. So it's fact specific, Paul. But surely as a buyer's agent, you have to do what's best for your buyer. It's not your job to enforce that rule.
But to be really clear, it is a violation on the listing agent side, and even though the seller's not bound by the code of ethics, it's a really slippery slope, and the listing agent could still be accused. They could still be subject of a complaint, and their defense might not hold up. there was a lot of talk about activity like this when, when we were shut down and the governor said, it was an executive order. We could not, do business in person and go see houses. And there were a lot of people saying, well, what if I don't know about it and my seller just opens the door? Well, do you really not know about it? And then the other side of that is, not only it may not work to claim ignorance as the professional realtor, licensed and realtor involved, but also, is it actually serving the seller? And if you are the agent for the seller, if you have a listing contract, you have a fiduciary duty to the seller to put their interests first and also to give them complete, full, objective information. Make sure they know all of their options, all of them, and the risks and benefits of every decision. And clearly, it may not always be a good idea to accept the first offer or the offer that's not in competition, or the offer that, has some special advantage and may not be giving you the best terms. So the listing agents who might be going out of their way to make excuses for this behavior are not actually helping their sellers. And they may be motivated by their own self-interest if they think they're going to have some benefit from this, maybe by, not having to share the commission with another agent, but it's not probably not in the seller's interest. Okay,
if there are no more questions about this, let's move into a separate topic, not unrelated to the wild market that we're in right now. The second topic is inspectors getting access to houses when buyers haven't made an offer yet, or when buyers have already made the offer and they waived inspections, and now they think they're going to sneak a home inspector in during one of their pre-settlement walkthrough inspections. Or, as I said earlier, they bring a home inspector with them for a showing, perhaps, before they even make an offer. Now, many home inspectors are violating their own law when they do this, and home inspectors don't know the laws and the code of ethics that we have to obey. So you can't do these things. You can't ever bring a home inspector or any inspector into a home without this seller's permission. Christina and I are going to point paragraph 12A in the agreement of sale out to you. We're going to point out two things in paragraph 12A, and then we're going to point out the code of ethics in Article 1 and Article 3. And I need a drink of water, so take it from here, Christina.
Okay, I'll take over. Let me show you the code of ethics first, because it ties together these two topics that we've been talking about. So just a moment. Let me
Article 1, Standard of Practice 1 dash.
Well, I was going to start with 3-9 and 3-10.
Good, good. That's cooperation between two brokers.
So Article 3 of the Code of Ethics is the article specifically about cooperation that we're talking about with, in fact, with both of these issues, because cooperation means sharing information or access with everybody equally. And so that is how it leads also to the clear cooperation policy. Specifically, we have standard of practice 3-10, which you should be able to see on the screen, that says you have to make a listed property available to all brokers for showing to prospective purchasers or tenants. So that's the principle that leads to the clear cooperation policy. But right before that, you also have standard of practice 3-9, which says even though we have an obligation to cooperate, that is a mutual. It goes both ways, that obligation. And that means that we shall not provide access to listed properties on terms other than those established by the owner and listing broker. So when you're a buyer's agent and you make a request to show a property, you're given access to that property under specific conditions. Oh, sorry, I didn't hit share. My bad. I thought I was sharing that whole time. So you should see it now. So standard of practice 3-9.
We still can't see it, Christine. Oh, now we can. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Just take a second. So when you're given confirmation to show a property, it's under specific conditions, right? Now we're used to seeing sometimes detailed directions about removing your shoes and not touching stuff and using sanitizer and limiting the number of people who are in the property. These are all the directions or the conditions under which we are given access. But also back up. The premise is we are confirmed for a showing. For an agent, a licensee has to be there. That is who is given access. Only we are confirmed to use the lockbox and have that code. We can't give it to somebody else. And we are expected to be there, only us and our clients, and the agent and clients. Sellers have a right to complain if you start bringing a big party of people. We know that happens, but we know we're supposed to get permission if extra people are coming. If mom and dad and the kids and, you know, and the Uncle Frank are coming, then you need to get permission for that. That is more than a showing. If you're doing anything besides an in-person showing to your clients, you need permission for that. If your client is not going to be there physically and you're going to do a live video showing, you need to get specific permission for that. That is not anymore included in your showing confirmation. For a little while, that was included. For many listings during the earlier times of the pandemic, the MLS rules and the showing time rules allowed listing agents to, by default, to select in-person and virtual showings. That's not the case anymore. It does not default to that anymore. So you need specific permission to do a video showing.
So Christina, go back and focus on the point. Can you bring a home inspector with you to a show?
Well, that's where I'm going. That also is not a showing. Now you have added something to the showing. You are trying to do some kind of inspection, evaluation, consultation. I don't care what you want to call it. That is not what is expected at a showing. And you need permission from the seller or listing agent before you can bring an inspector to a showing.
And maybe you can get that permission in an email exchange or a text exchange. Get it in writing, protect yourself, and get the permission. But now I want to bring you to the area in which the home inspectors are violating their own law. There's a home inspection law since 2001 in Pennsylvania, which defines what a home inspection is. It's an inspection of more than one system of the property. It's done by a home inspector who meets the qualifications of the act, and there must be a written report prepared and submitted by the home inspector. Must have a written report. So these home inspectors who say, I'll come with you on a showing for $100 or $200, and I'll show you whether or not it's a good house or not, and I'll look at the foundation, I'll look at the heating system, I'll look at the roof, and I'm going to look at these things. And because I'm not going to give you a report, I'm only charging you $150, he's violating, or she is violating the law by not giving a written report. And remember, the law entitles the owner of the property, the seller, to a copy of any written report as well. And then the seller would have to disclose any defects to any future buyers. It gets very, very complicated when home inspectors violate their own law about written reports. So if a seller does say, okay, you want to bring an inspector on a showing, that's fine, but it has to be a written report after that. Most home inspectors are not in the business of doing that. So
well, and think about it. Why are they not comfortable making reports based on a 1 hour or half an hour tour of the property? Because they haven't done what is qualified as a full inspection. So they are bending their own rules, and it is not correct. They are trained and qualified to do an inspection. But you know, everybody's struggling in this market. They want more business, less inspections are happening. So they're trying to invent new ways to have, you know, value and to be involved in our transactions, but they're bending their own rules. They're not doing what they're actually qualified for, which is an inspection. No. They're trying to do something less, and there really isn't anything less that they are qualified to do. They do a full inspection and they produce a report, or they shouldn't be doing it. And so you need permission for them to access. You absolutely must, because that could be a violation of the Code of Ethics if you bring someone in for a purpose other than a showing, other than a straightforward showing with clients. And you must get a report. Now, but I see some questions which we'll answer, but let me just demonstrate, let me give an example of why this, you know, practice of bringing inspectors in without permission and sometimes without the seller's knowledge, could be so problematic. We all know that sellers have an obligation to disclose no material defects, and they fill out a seller's disclosure. And if they had a full inspection report, they would have to attach that or include that information on their seller's disclosure. Also, the agents involved are obligated to disclose any defects we know, even if it doesn't show up on a disclosure or a report. So now imagine the situation where a home inspector goes through a property without the seller or listing agent knowing that that happened. And even if they're only there for an hour or half an hour, they discover some defect, but they don't write it down. They don't produce a report. But then the buyer and buyer agent tell the seller, or they tell the listing agent, hey, well, you've got this thing wrong with the property. You've got to tell people, or you've got to accept a lower offer, or whatever they tell them. Now, does that listing agent or seller know that that's true? They don't have documentation. They don't know what expertise is reporting.
Christina, I just want to go back. When we wrote the law in Pennsylvania, I was there. I helped write the law. We made it specific that the home inspector, it's the law of the land of Pennsylvania that home inspectors must write a report. So we don't even have to explain the why. You're doing a great job on the why, Christina, but it's breaking the law in Pennsylvania. You don't want to be a participant in breaking the law in Pennsylvania by not having a written report. Christina, rightly, you're going into all the ramifications of what can happen when you don't have a written report. But it's also the danger of allowing the inspector in. Paloma, there's no such thing as an informal inspector with consultation. It's called a home inspection.
The inspectors are making up things that they're not supposed to do.
Read the law. So
Jonathan, go ahead.
Jonathan says, must I get permission to view the property by myself with no client? Absolutely, yes. You must get permission. Read and listen. Okay, go ahead, Christina.
Well, that's very easy, Jonathan. You would usually call that a preview, which is that is fairly common practice. When you request the appointment through showing time, you can select preview. You have a number of different types of showings or types of appointments that you can request. And that is one of the ways you can easily communicate and get permission. So you can simply request a preview or a showing or a second showing or an inspection or an appraisal.
But you're not allowed to make a video while you're there.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So getting permission to do a preview is simple. It can be done right through showing time. If you plan, however, to do video, especially if you're planning to record anything to share later, you need permission for that, because that is, again, not a showing. And once you have recorded something, where is it going? Is it going only to your client, or is it possibly being shared in other ways? You must have permission to take the video, and you must be clear about what you're going to do with that. If you're the listing agent and someone asks you, your question is, well, then where's that video going? You must have permission, because you cannot market a property if you're not the listing agent. You may not take a video and share it if you are not the listing agent, unless you have written permission. Okay.
Yeah. So,
and that includes sharing it with your own clients. So that happens more and more, and it's not like it's wrong, but you must have permission. It's a very good tool to have. It's going to happen more and more in the market, but we must have permission before we do it.
So we're going into the weeds here, thanks to Jonathan and Keith, but let me do it. Keith is asking, during a showing, can a buyer or buyer's agent utilize tools such as a moisture reader? Well, the answer is a buyer and their agent can do anything during a showing that's non-invasive. So if you want to take out a tape measure and measure the walls, okay, Christina, go ahead.
Well, but you're limited by your expertise and your competence.
Sure.
So you can't presume to do a job or to use a tool that you're not an expert in. Now, your client may be, or your client may bring that, and if it's not invasive, okay. But if you're an agent, don't try to act like a home inspector. Huge liability.
Okay. Now, Christina, just to close the idea that article Standard of Practice 3-9 said what it said, Standard of Practice 1-16 says the same thing, but it's for in-house listings if you think about it, because Article 3 is about cooperation between two brokers, and Standard of Practice 116 says realtors shall not access or use or permit or enable others to access, use, listed or manage property on terms or conditions other than those authorized by the owner or seller. So you can't bring a home inspector with you without the seller's permission. Now let's go to the agreement of sale, where we now have an executed agreement of sale, and we want to read paragraph 12A.
Paragraph 12 should be seeing.
Yeah. Why don't we read 12A, saying who can be at inspections, and showing what the pre-settlement walkthrough inspection is about, and why you can't bring a home inspector then either.
So I'll read it if you like. So paragraph 12 is about the buyer's due diligence. 12A is the rights and responsibilities section. And number 2 says buyer may make 2 pre-settlement walkthrough inspections of the property for the limited purpose of determining that the condition of the property is as required by this agreement and any addenda. Buyer's right to these inspections is not waived, et cetera, et cetera. And then later on,
now go to 12A1, Christina.
12A1, before that says that where the seller says they'll provide access to insurers, representatives as may be required, mortgage lenders, surveyors, municipal officials, appraisers, inspectors. In addition, unless otherwise agreed, only parties and their real estate licensees may attend any inspections. So you can't bring a load of other people or other experts without permission, and you can't bring an inspector to a pre-settlement walkthrough without permission. If you need an inspector for some reason to check on some condition that you can't see for yourself, then you must have permission to bring that inspector, and you're probably
Christina,
not.
I had a call yesterday from an agent who was upset. She was at a home inspection, and the seller was walking around with the inspector through his house. And I said, read paragraph 12A1. The seller's allowed to be there. And if the listing agent wanted to be there, the listing agent could be there. But no one else. Uncle Frank cannot be there, even though he, is a handyman and he knows everything. He cannot come without permission. A home inspector cannot come without permission. No one can come except the parties. And if there's an inspector being done according to this agreement, such as a home inspector, only the home inspector and the buyer and the buyer's agent and the seller and the seller's agent can be there. No one else. And at the pre-settlement inspection, only, as you read a second ago, only the parties and their agents can be at the pre-settlement inspection. You can't bring a home inspector with you to a pre-settlement inspection without special permission. If you intend to do those things, write them into your agreement before it's accepted. Yeah, see what happens in today's market when you start writing things like that in the agreement. But if you want something different than what's in the agreement, you can negotiate for it before the agreement's executed. But right now, you need to all read paragraph 12A and understand everything in 12A and explain it to your buyers and explain it to your sellers. No exceptions.
I think we have a raised hand from Florence.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if I had gotten permission, but I had a buyer to re-inspect heating repairs done by the seller, and the HVAC professional said, you have a cracked heat exchanger, and we got a whole new heating system. Now, I believe I had permission to bring in the HVAC specialist to reevaluate the repair. Wasn't written into the agreement of sale, but you're saying then that had the seller said, no, you can't bring in your HVAC specialist, then we would have just been out of luck? Because as it was, I think the seller was...
No,
yeah.
Florence, I would think the seller would give permission, but if he wouldn't, you would demand receipts showing that he did the repair, and you would call the contractor up and talk to them. There's other ways of solving that if the seller won't let you bring the inspector back.
Oh, we had...
You can also... You can also
Yeah.
control some of this depending on how, by how you write your CTA after inspections, your change in terms addendum. And if there are repairs. So one of the things, this is digressing again, but when you negotiate repairs, you need to describe what end result will satisfy the buyer. So if the end result that will satisfy the buyer is a re-inspection, you can make that part of the addendum you agree to. Or if the end result is documentation from a particular contractor, then that's what you make the terms of your addendum.
A typical one is radon. A radon system will be installed to bring the radon levels down. Yeah, but you also need a retest from an independent company, not the company that installed the system, and have those test results given to you. You have to remember to close the loop. You just don't say install a radon mitigation system. You have to say what the result is that Christina just spoke about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with that, you have to think about that, that sort of thing when you are writing your replies to inspections, because if you're going to require repairs, you have to think about how you're going to be able to know they are done and make that part of your
Christina,
terms.
that brings to mind a future class, maybe one that you might want to do. Agents, not just in our company, but agents from other companies, write horrendously bad CTAs.
So I have taught this class to the coaching group more than once.
Thank you. Okay, so do we understand the code of ethics is clear? You can't bring a home inspector into the property without the seller's permission. And once the agreement is executed, no one else is allowed to come to inspections except the parties and their agents. And the pre-settlement inspection is only to ascertain that the property is in the condition it was in when the agreement was executed. So don't think you can sneak a home inspection into a pre-settlement inspection. I've gotten this call about 20 times in the past couple of months where they say, oh, we waived inspections, but we're going to use one of our pre-settlement inspections, on day 10 to bring a home inspector with us. No, you can't do that. So please be clear.
I've had that too. And with my advice, the seller said, no, that's not the purpose of a pre-settlement inspection. Plus you can't call it a pre-settlement inspection if it's 3 days after the contract was signed. Well, no.
Yeah, and remember, we did an entire breakfast with your broker about this idea of inspections for informational purposes only, how that doesn't work, it doesn't exist, and don't try that either without talking to us.
Well, that's the end of we're wrapped up unless there are more questions, right?
What do you got, guys? Questions?
I don't have a question. I just want to remind everybody that Thursday is Red Day and we are supporting our own Tim Mullen. So guys, don't forget.
Thank you, Terry.
Excellent.
I know I'll see a lot of you tomorrow. Don't worry if you're hearing this for the first time, because it just means you don't need it, but there's a class tomorrow for a lot of you. That is the required ethics class, which I am teaching just for our two offices, Media and Brandywine. So I'll see a bunch of you there.
It meets the suburban west requirement that you have to do. If you don't do it tomorrow, you got to do it by December 31st. And yours truly is going to be in the class as a student. I'll try to be good, teacher.
Yeah. Paloma, if you didn't hear about the class, that means you don't need it, so don't worry about it. But it's the required ethics class that everybody has to take by the end of the year. But most of our agents have already taken it, but we've put a class together for those who still have not.
Any new agent who has become a member of the Tri-County Suburban Realtors, formerly the Suburban West Realtors Association, in the past couple of years would have taken what's called the orientation course, and that included this topic. So you don't need to take it. If you're not sure if you need to take it, pick up the phone after you get off this class and call up the Tri-County Suburban Realtors at 610-560-4800.
But don't worry, if you needed it, you'd have gotten an email like once a week about it. Ashley and Lauren have done a really great job telling everybody who needs it to take it. So if you haven't heard it, it's because you don't need it. And Nafisa, you're saying you don't have an end time. It is, oh, there you go. Ashley answered you. Wonderful. It goes to 4. It's a 3.5-hour class. It is required for credit. So it's not continuing ed credit. It's professional standards credit for the association. So you need it. And it is 3.5 hours.
So yep. One of the confusing things is the National Association of Realtors says that every 3 years, and the 3 years ends December 31st of 2021, you must take a 2.5-hour course in ethics, an update in ethics. This course from Tri-County Suburban Realtors, your local realtor association, not only fulfills the NAR requirement, it not only fulfills their own requirement for this 3.5-hour course, but it also includes the 2.5-hour NAR requirement. So you're really killing 2 birds with 1 stone. You don't have to pay any tuition for it. You get the best instructor in the world, and it's a win-win-win. So if you are registered for the course, we all hope to see you tomorrow afternoon.
We will.
All right.
All right.